Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So, I just watched Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Let's talk about it. So Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is of course the sequel to 2018's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which was directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller. And here they have returned to produce the film but not direct it. But many of you guys will know that Into the Spider-Verse is one of my favorite films from the last decade. Easily, hands down. Okay, in fact my very first video on this channel was the best movies of 2018 video, and spoiler alert if you haven't seen that video, but Spider-Verse absolutely makes an appearance on that list. And I have since mentioned it in all different videos. I've done a best movies of the decade video where it was mentioned, and more recently last year I ranked all of the Spider-Man movies, and spoiler alert for that video as well, but Spider-Verse is definitely quite the contender in that list as well. So honestly, ever since I watched the first Spider-Verse movie in 2018, it's been living rent-free in my mind, and so the stakes were so high going into the sequel. And when I tell you that not only did the sequel meet my expectations, which were already hit, my expectations were already sky high, but this sequel blew my expectations out of the water. Sony came to play. Sony wasn't messing around. Sony came to hunt, gather, and eat. Sony ate the other girlies up with this sequel. I cannot believe that they have managed to make lightning strike twice. This film is a masterpiece. I can't wait to dive into all of the aspects of this movie in this review. By the way, this is going to be a spoiler review. I did notice that a couple of people were surprised that I went into the spoilers for The Little Mermaid in my previous review. So just to let you know and give you a heads up, this is going to be a spoiler review. I'm going to be diving into everything. Listen, there is so much to discuss. Okay, this film is literally everything and more. So be sure to get yourselves nice and comfortable, grab a snack, because we're gonna have a great time discussing this movie. But before we dive into it, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. And be sure to give this video a like if you enjoy my reviews. Now without further ado, let's discuss. So first of all, let's dive into the story of this sequel. So at the beginning of the film, we actually get this little prelude that explores Gwen's story. We get a flashback sequence, you know, showing us Gwen's origin story and a little bit more detail to what we saw in the first movie. And we see that in her world, she was the one that was bitten by the radioactive spider, those goddamn radioactive arachnids. But Peter Parker was her best friend, and he started to feel kind of less than, you know, and insubstantial in comparison to the wonder that is Spider-Woman. And so he started experimenting on himself, and lo and behold, he turns into the Lizard. And so Spider-Woman ends up fighting against the Lizard, and Gwen ends up having to confront Peter, her best friend, in this horrible traumatic way, which leads to this like great battle that ultimately leads to his demise. And unfortunately, to make matters worse, her father, the captain of the police department, happens to witness this whole ordeal, and he of course assumes the worst, thinking that Spider-Woman was behind the death of Peter Parker, not realizing that he is accusing his own child. So the PDNY, which is what they call the NYPD in this series, is so funny, but the PDNY ends up putting out a warrant for Spider-Woman's arrest, and you know, the captain is out here trying to hunt Spider-Woman down, but she's still trying to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Woman of her universe. Then one day a bad guy comes along in the form of the Vulture, not Michael Keaton's version, okay, a very different kind of Vulture who is two-dimensional and looks like a drawing come to life, and he also looks like he's come straight from the Renaissance, and I'm not talking about Beyonce's Renaissance either. He comes along clearly from the wrong universe, and he's causing mayhem and trouble, the likes of which we we saw in the first movie, and so Gwen already knows what's up and she's trying to get him back to his universe to rectify things. But clearly the way that everything was resolved in the first film didn't fix everything. There are still issues in the multiverse, and Gwen is seeing that firsthand. But luckily Gwen doesn't have to deal with this issue on her own for very long, because in comes Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, who is brilliantly voiced by none other than Issa Rae. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so a very pregnant Jessica Drew swoops in there and helps Gwen out with this, you know, a multiversal anomaly. And it turns out that Jessica is working alongside Oscar Isaac's Miguel O'Hara, and they're part of this elite spider force, and they're trying to tackle all of these anomalies that keep popping up everywhere across the multiverse. So Gwen becomes really interested in their team dynamic when she sees them work together, and that kind of plays into her overarching theme in this prelude, which is this feeling of loneliness, you know, being alone. She doesn't have anyone else that she can lean to in this universe as Spider-Woman. She lost her best friend Peter Parker, and now her father, you know, is literally out on a woman hunt for her unknowingly, and she just feels really alone in this world. And so she's stuck between a rock and a hard place, because she doesn't feel like she can tell her father who she really is, because she feels like it would destroy their relationship for good once he finds out that she's been lying to him. And this is a theme that we'll see carry out throughout the film, and it will apply to Miles' situation as well, which I thought was so clever. Because can you imagine being mixed up in this multiverse of madness, okay, done right, mind you, and we'll talk about that later, but you meet these like other versions of yourself or other versions of your superhero persona, and you have this connection with one another. You have these commonalities, and it's just like a connection that you haven't felt with anyone else before. And then all of a sudden, just when you guys are getting in the swing of things, right, they all go. They all leave, they all go back home, and you're on your own again. I felt like that was a really kind of relatable arc, emotional arc for these characters to go through. And then to make matters worse, her father pretty much confirms her worst suspicions when he pulls a gun on her, okay, upon discovering her in the scene of the crime with the vulture, and she removes her mask. Oh my goodness, this part shook me. She removed her mask to show him, look, don't shoot, it's me, it's your daughter. It's your daughter. And I'm here thinking, oh, thank goodness, he's gonna put the gun down. It's gonna be okay. But no, my guy still holds up the gun. And I'm like, oh, hang on. Hang on a minute. That made no sense to me. Massive L on the father's part. It made no sense to me, because he's upset that Spider-Woman allegedly killed Peter Parker, his daughter's best friend. He's trying to avenge his daughter's best friend by what? Killing his daughter. This man is not with him. So again, in that moment, the captain pretty much confirms Gwen's worst fears, because in that moment, he decides to put the badge before his daughter. And so Gwen ultimately decides to join the elite Spider-Verse force, and she jumps through, you know, the interdimensional portal in order to be led by Miguel O'Hara, like the rest of the Spider people across the multiverse. And then after this little prelude, we are reintroduced to the one, the only Miles Morales. First of all, it picks up right where we left off in the first movie, and we kind of get to see his progress over the course of a year and 4 months, you know, being his universe's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, you know, running or swinging around Brooklyn, you know, trying to stop crimes and that. And it's just wonderful to see him in his element and become more confident. He grew up as well during this time, which is crazy. So we get to see a more kind of grown-up version of the character. I just love Miles Morales. I love Miles Morales so much. I am such a fan. Okay, listen, Shameik Moore, for all of his faults perhaps, just does such an incredible job voicing this character. I mean, we're going to talk about the individual, you know, characters and the voice cast later, but man, he just kills it. Like, he is Miles. He is the voice of Miles. It's perfection. But also, of course, the animation, the way that the character is depicted is also just mwah. He's just such an endearing character. He's so lovable and relatable. Like, who doesn't love Miles? So yeah, when we're reintroduced to him, we see how he's progressed as Spider-Man. But unfortunately, he has that age-old issue that all Spider-Men or Spider-People have of, you know, trying to balance the secret identity with his real life as Miles Morales. We've seen this in, you know, the Sam Raimi trilogy. We saw this in Anthony Garfield's trilogy as well. Like, we've seen this kind of story before where it's difficult to balance being Spider-Man, you know, living under that mask and trying to do as much good as you can with your powers, with being the person underneath the mask and, you know, being honest and truthful and open to the friends and family around you. So Miles is really struggling with this at the beginning. He's supposed to be at an appointment with like a careers advisor type person in his school. His parents are there waiting on him. Everyone's like, where is this kid? You know, his parents are trying to cover for him, but it's not looking good. And in the meantime, he's trying to get there, but then he gets interrupted by the Spot, who we'll talk about later. But yeah, he has a whole, you know, confrontation with the Spot, who at that point is just a bit of a joke. He's a villain of the week type character. And Miles thinks that he can get this over and done with within like 5 minutes before he goes to his meeting, but little does he know. Anyway, it's during this meeting between, you know, Miles and his parents and the careers advisor that we kind of get a rundown on the crux of the issue with Miles's emotional arc in this film, and the kind of a conflict that he has with this dual identity, because there seems to be a huge disconnect from what his parents expect of him and what they think he's up to versus his actual reality and what he actually wants to achieve. But just as people are starting to understand each other a little bit more, Miles has to head on off again because the Spot became an even bigger problem than he was before. And then the Spot goes from being a villain of the week to a literal multiversal catastrophic villain who has the potential of just taking us all down with him. And once again, the personal and academic struggles of Miles Morales had to be shoved to the side in favor of focusing on Spider-Man's duties. And like I said, we've seen this kind of battle between the dual identities of, you know, hidden superheroes before many times, but I feel like once again, because Miles is such an endearing character who we've really come to love and really care about, it just hurts to see him be pulled in these different directions, especially because of the really special relationship that he has with his parents. I mean, he's one of the few superheroes out here on these streets who have living, breathing parents, okay? But right now, it's really under a huge strain because of this massive secret that he's keeping. And so I loved that scene when they're fighting the Spot. I think it's just afterwards where Miles, you know, is under the mask as Spider-Man talking to his dad, and his dad is just like lamenting about his son, like, what do I do? And Miles is trying to give him advice as Spider-Man with this like fake voice, and of course his dad doesn't realize that he's talking to said son. But I just love that interaction because it speaks to, you know, his dad, you know, really trying to figure out, you know, what to do. It's something that is playing on his mind a lot when it comes to his relationship with his son. Then you also have Miles, who again has to be dishonest. He has to keep the secret, but he's also showing a little bit of honesty in what he actually wants from his parents at this time. And as I mentioned earlier, another part of Miles's emotional arc in this film is centered on the other Spider people that he was introduced to in the first movie, and who became a part of his team and his community, and he all of a sudden lost them at the end of the film when he saved the multiverse. He's definitely feeling that loss, especially the loss of one particular person, Gwen. And so he's drawing her and he really misses her, and he even adapts the expectations mural that he did in the first film with his uncle, to include all of the spider people, you know, their whole team, which I think was really touching. And it just speaks to, again, that kind of connection and bonds that they had when they were together, because they had such, you know, a commonality between them despite their differences. But fortunately for Miles, he does manage to reunite with Gwen sooner rather than later, because she jumps into his universe seemingly to visit him, but no, not really. Sis has a mission, okay? She's supposed to be keeping track of the Spot, who, like I said, has become quite the problem. And I have to say, I love the way that they develop the character of the Spot throughout the film. The fact that he starts off as this kind of measly, laughable villain of the week that you don't really take seriously. Like, he's literally a joke, and Miles is kind of playing around with him, not taking him as a threat at all. And then he just gradually gets worse as he learns more about his powers. I mean, this was a scientist that was, again, featured in the first film, who had a bagel thrown on his head. Yet another bagel in a multiverse movie, okay? He had a bagel thrown on his head and it changed his life forever. And so he has this kind of connection to Miles where he's like, well, I'm one of the scientists who worked on the collider, so technically I helped make you, and you helped make me by throwing a bagel on my head, which ensured that I was there when everything went to crap. And so now he has these like powers of interdimensional travel. He has portals on his body that appear as spots, and at first he's very insecure about it, and he's just doing these like petty crimes because he literally has no other choice. He's not like a functioning member of society anymore. But then he just increases in bitterness and anger. He's angry about, you know, what happened to him. He's angry that Miles isn't even taking him seriously. His anger and frustration just continues to grow until he's become this like shadow version of himself. And that like gradual turn that we see throughout the film is so good. And on top of this excellent writing, you have the animation which depicts that so brilliantly. You have that moment where the Spot has become like the worst version of himself down the line, and he's just like all dark, and the animation behind him is going wild. It's just like a perfect encapsulation of the chaos and anger that has festered inside of him, that has turned him into the worst version of himself. So yeah, Gwen is supposed to be dealing with that. But instead she got distracted by Miles. You know, she swung by to say hi. They have this really great conversation, kind of, you know, echoing these feelings of being lonely ever since they have had to depart and go back to their respective universes. And there's this beautiful shot of like their version of New York, and they're both sitting upside down on a tall building. Like, we'll talk about the animation later, but I mean, just so many incredible shots to choose from in this film. Every single frame is a masterpiece, and that is one of the more like visually stunning sequences that we have in an already impressive film. Then Gwen returns to what has become the Spot's hideout, and she had this camera that was supposed to be capturing his every move, and she figures out what he's been up to, trying to create more portals so that he can dip in and out of different universes. And you know, Jessica and Miguel, okay, are keeping a close eye on her because she's a new recruit. She's kind of letting Jessica down because Jessica was the one who vouched for her to Miguel, and so she's trying to figure out a way to fix it without alerting them. But little does she know, she's also been followed by Miles, who wants to figure out what's going on as well. And so both of them end up traveling to a whole different universe, and that's where we get the multiverse of madness aspect of this film. Now, I will say, when it comes to the story, the way that it's structured is really interesting because, like I said, you have that whole prelude with Gwen's backstory and getting a better understanding of her character, and a lot of the things that, you know, she's going through are echoed in Miles's character as well. But it's just interesting how the first, I don't know, 15-20 minutes of the film feel like a Gwen movie, and then we get, you know, the titles, and then we get to meet Miles once again, and it feels like this kind of mini movie in itself before Miles even goes on his multiversal adventure. So I think with this structure, it did feel like the film felt long, but not in like a bad way or a painful way. First of all, because I was trying to capture every single scene that I was watching. I was on the edge of my seat, like, I want to see everything, right? But then also because of this like different structure, it's not like a clean 3-act structure, because this isn't just, you know, a whole story in itself. So it does feel a bit odd to have this kind of mini movie that happens before the real movie starts, where Miles jumps into the multiverse. And then when Miles does jump in through that portal into the multiverse, I mean, that's where all bets are off. That's where things go crazy. I mean, as I keep saying, this is the multiverse of madness that we deserved. You know, I remember saying, as I kept saying in my review of Doctor Strange 2, it was absolutely crazy that, considering the budget of that film, we didn't get even a slither of the imagination and creativity from the multiverse concept that we did from a small film like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like, the fact that those two films tackled similar topics with vastly different budgets, and yet the smaller one, the smaller A24 film, managed to give us more inspiration, more ingenuity, more imagination than Doctor Strange 2 was baffling. But now here with Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, we have an example of a multiverse story done right within the genre. It was phenomenal. It was so inventive. I keep saying creative, imaginative. Like, I mean, in these films in general, every single frame is a masterpiece because of the beautiful animation style. But then you add in the fact that each universe they visited was in a distinct, beautiful artistic style. If you contrast Gwen's universe, which is done in this beautiful watercolor style, to Miles's universe, which is very much like a comic book come to life, and then you go to Spider-Man India's universe, okay, and his style is a little bit like more rough and ready. You have these bright colors all around, and it's just really busy and vibrant, just how you would imagine a hybrid between Mumbai and Manhattan to be. And then you get into Spider-Punk, where his aesthetic is just so different, literally just breaking the rules of all of the other artistic styles. His different body parts are in different frame rates. Like, just reading about the extent to which they made the effort to make each of these universes feel unique, feel different and distinct, was just mind-blowing. And the result of their hard work is on screen. You can see each hour, you can see the fruits of each and every one of the 1,000 animators' work. My brother made the joke during the film that those 1,000 animators surely did not see their families for at least 2 years. And like, that's really sad to think about. In my opinion, the fruits of their labors were absolutely worth it, because what a masterclass in animation. Now, before I touch on my thoughts on each of the characters, I just want to circle back to the multiverse element of this story, because the multiverse overall has become quite the popular topic, as we've seen across the board. I was going to say throughout the superhero landscape, but not even, because Everything Everywhere All at Once was a whole indie movie, okay, that explored the multiverse. I think it's so fascinating how since 2018, when the first Spider-Verse movie came out, the multiverse has become like a huge kind of mainstream topic to explore in media. And so more and more people have become exposed to this concept that was, you know, previously just relegated to being in comics or books and such. But I do think that even mainstream audiences are able to tell the difference between good storytelling in the multiverse and not so great storytelling. In the last 2 or 3 years, we have gotten so many multiverse stories, and not all of them have been great. I really appreciated the Loki series, which introduced us to a whole bunch of different Lokis. You had Spider-Man No Way Home, which brought all of the live action Peter Parkers together. You of course had Everything Everywhere All at Once, which was its own thing that was a spectacular spectacular film that explored, you know, very similar topics. And then Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which I think wasted the concept largely. And that film was supposed to be a huge anchor in Marvel's new multiverse saga, which I think has been struggling to find its footing, especially because of the feeling of a lack of direction. And it certainly didn't help that we got Quantumania earlier this year, which kind of touches on the multiverse as well, especially through the character of Kang, and that was a huge, gigantic flop, both creatively and financially. So like I said, we've gotten a whole range of different multiverse stories with mixed success. Spider-Verse is clearly a huge success in this realm, but it won't be too long until we get yet another one in the form of The Flash. So my question is, how long is it going to take for mainstream audiences to get sick of this concept, especially if everyone is doing it at the same time? And should Kevin Feige be worried? Because it seems like he's put all of his eggs in the wrong basket here. At this point, surprisingly, okay, I have full faith in Sony being able to deliver an exceptional multiverse saga of its own through the Spider-Verse movies. But I do think that Marvel is in a little bit of a pickle here because of its investment in the multiverse saga, considering the fact that Spider-Verse so far has done it so much better. And also considering the fact that DC is now, you know, jumping onto this train as well. To be fair, The Flash has been in development for literally 27 years, and so this idea has been around for a while. But at the end of the day, it only counts when the film comes out, and that movie is coming out in 2 weeks, so we'll see if the multiverse saga can be sustained across all of these different franchises. Okay, so now let's get into the characters. I'm going to give you guys a breakdown of my favorite Spider people from this film, starting off, of course, with Miles. Duh. I've already talked about the first part of this story, and then he dives into the multiverse and he himself experiences the glitches that the other Spider people did in the first movie, which was interesting. But another thing to note is this kind of arc that he has about allowing himself to take space, especially in places where he doesn't seem invited. That of course fits perfectly with the fact that Miguel doesn't want him to join the special force, the special Spider-Verse force, and it turns out it's because Miles is an anomaly. He wasn't supposed to become Spider-Man. You know, his universe already had their version of Spider-Man in Peter Parker, who was voiced by Chris Pine, and so when Miles was bitten by a spider, Peter Parker ended up dying, and that wasn't a part of the canon. It's very interesting that they're using these very like fandom and comic specific verbiage to describe these things. I wonder how like mainstream audiences find it. Like, were they confused by the word canon? Like like if you're part of the mainstream audience, although I don't think you are because you're watching this video, if you are, let me know what you thought of this like language that they were using, because I'm used to hearing it in the fandom, but maybe you guys were confused, I don't know. But yeah, you know, Peter Parker's death in Miles's universe wasn't part of the canon, and so Miles is an anomaly in his own universe, which is a really interesting concept. So clever. We're using our brains. I love it when writers use the brain. Then you have that moment where he's like fighting with Miguel, and Miguel is just spitting all of these hateful things at him. Miguel, we'll talk about Miguel. Miguel is spitting all these hateful things at him, but then Miles remembers what his mum said, and his mum told him. His mum said that he needs to allow himself to make space in these places, okay? Never let anyone tell you you do not belong. And that's exactly what Miguel tried to say. No. Miles was like, nah, I was raised right. You can't tell me I don't belong, okay? And he proved why it is that he was always meant to be Spider-Man, regardless of the canon. In a regular movie, that whole arc would have been complete, and this would have been the end of the story. But because this is a two-parter, we get that extra element of Miles trying to save his father, which Miguel was trying to stop him from doing because his father's death is a canon event. But Miles is like, no, like there must be another way. Like, instead of just trying to follow the canon and leading to all of this suffering across the Spider people, how about we do something differently? And Miguel's like, no, I tried doing that. It led to the destruction of my universe, which again, we'll talk about Miguel. And so Miles tries to get away from the Spider Force headquarters, but inadvertently ends up in the wrong universe, which I suspected because I saw that the DNA read him as being from Earth 42, and I was like, is that his universe? I don't think it is. And then it wasn't. But it was done so well. The reveal was done so well, because you have Gwen outside his window, and I thought that Gwen was listening in on him tell his mother the truth. But no, instead he's just in a completely different universe talking to a completely different woman. And then Uncle Aaron comes through, and I know that it's a wrap. I'm like, oh, we're not where I thought we were. But then things get even juicier, because he follows Uncle Aaron up to the roof where he's introduced to the Prowler. I thought that was Uncle Aaron. Okay, when I heard the Prowler theme, which I'm very familiar with because I rewatched Spider-Verse literally last week. So when I heard that Prowler theme, I was like, oh, that's Uncle Aaron. Like, he's the Prowler. No. That would be too easy. That would be too simple. No, the Prowler is Miles, because their universe doesn't have a Spider-Man, and so the crime has run amok. The city is in flames, and Miles Morales is a criminal. Oh, that ends. Oh, when is the third film coming out again? Not soon enough. Okay, so that's enough on Miles. Next, let's talk about my second favorite Spider person, and that is Hobie, aka Spider-Punk. Listen, when I tell you, I did not know anything. This is the amount that I knew about Spider-Punk before Friday. 0. Literally 0. And I saw pictures of him on Twitter. Like, I saw people get excited, and I didn't understand. I was like, listen, I like Miles Morales, I like Gwen, I have my favorites, you know, that's who I'm looking forward to seeing. But the surprise that I got, I felt deeply in love with Hobie. Absolutely. You know how like Gwen kept talking about Hobie in the movie and everyone was like, oh my god, Hobie's so cool. That's how I felt in this film after we were actually introduced to the character. Now here's the thing. Hi, I'm Jean. I'm British. I don't know if you can tell from my accent. Okay. I'm from the UK. Okay. And this character is British, but also voiced by Daniel Kaluuya. So you already know. Listen, Shameik Moore as Miles, perfect casting. Daniel Kaluuya as Spider-Punk is legendary. It's out of this world. Honest, it's out of this multiverse. It's perfection. Okay, his delivery, when I tell you as a British person, his delivery was excellent. He has this kind of Cockney twist as well, and I was fully expecting this character to be white. Okay, I was fully expecting this character to be white. When he takes off that mask, reveals the locks, okay, and the black skin, I was like, what is going on? Because usually when punk is depicted, it's seen as like a part of, you know, a white subculture. And so to have this black character be Spider-Punk was genius and incredible. And I know now in the comics he's also a black character, but they depicted him as being particularly dark skinned and even more punk, and I just loved that. And what I loved even more is that the punk aspect didn't just stop with his aesthetic, although his aesthetic was incredibly well realized, but it was also with his actual ethics. He was never really into the, you know, Spider-Verse force that Miguel was leading. You know, he always had that resistance towards authority and the establishment, and he made that clear from the jump. But the fact that he actually followed through is something that made me appreciate and respect the character even more. It wasn't just the snide remarks that I found very funny, but I was looking to see where the character would go still. But in the end, when he actually followed through, he made this different version of the interdimensional device that Gwen could use to hop all over the multiverse. And even before that, he was, you know, guiding Miles towards the right direction, helping him use his powers more efficiently. Like, but Hobie is just such a G. Hobie is such a VIP character. It's actually wild. Like, Hobie, great introduction into this unit. Bravo. So yeah, when it comes to Spider-Punk, what I would want to see in the third film is more of his universe. I feel like his universe would be really hard to look at because of the flashing images and the different frame rates that they use, but I'm sure they'll be able to realize it beautifully in the way that they have done everything else. But I need to see more of Hobie's universe the way that we got Spider-Man India's universe. And speaking of Spider-Man India, here's my third favorite. Pav is my bestie. Okay, Pav is such a great character. As soon as they landed in, what's it called, Mumbattan? Mumbai. It's a hybrid between Mumbai and Manhattan. But as soon as they landed there and they met him, he was just such a cool character. He's everything that Peter Parker isn't. He's brilliantly voiced by Karen Soni in this film. But I really liked getting to see Spider-Man India's world, you know, his universe and his story. You get to the canon events as well, like the almost death of the captain, which Miles Morales prevents, much to Miguel's chagrin. But I really loved the characterization of Spider-Man India. I think he was such a great character. I know a lot of people were really excited to see him, especially Indians. And honestly, I'm really excited to see him again for the third movie because he was a great addition to the team. And when I saw them all team up at the end, I was jumping for joy. I was like, let's go. I love this new team. And then next up, I would say fourth on my list was Gwen. I really liked the prelude and getting to see more of her character, but I was frustrated with her. And when she joined Miguel's Spider Society and she just started to turn on Miles, and like she wasn't being the friend that I needed her to be, okay? So I got frustrated with her, and that's why I had to dock her, you know, down my list of VIPs. But she did manage to see the light in the end, which I appreciated. And she enlisted the help of Spider-Punk to make that device and try and find Miles in his world. But of course, in the end, he was in the wrong universe himself. My next favorite character would be Spider-Byte, and not just because she's a black girl, although mostly yes, because she's a black girl, but also because she actually helped Miles. She saw the light even sooner than Gwen did, which I appreciated. Anyone who was going against Miguel was on my good books, because Miguel was trifling. And speaking of, let's discuss Miguel for a second here, because I don't trust this man. People have been making the distinction between Miguel and the Spot in this movie, saying that Miguel is an antagonist versus the Spot, who is the out and out villain. You know, he's the one who's trying to kill Miles's father. But I don't know. I feel like Miguel is just... I think we're supposed to feel like he means well, because he just wants to bring, you know, order into the multiverse, and he has been holding things together apparently until Miles messed them up. But something about him is just so evil. I feel like people are distracted by his hotness and the fact that he's voiced by Oscar Isaac. But to me, I'm not distracted. I'm paying attention, remember? And I feel like Miguel is just like, And then there was this line that Miles said, you know, when Miguel was chasing after him and he used these claws, and Miles was like, are you sure you're even a Spider-Man? And I was like, are we sure he's even a Spider-Man? Like, there's something about Miguel that I just don't trust. Now, it could be nothing. It could be a red herring, okay? But I wouldn't be surprised if this time next year, or actually in March next year, we come to discover that Miguel is not who he says he is. Because I'm telling you, there's something fishy going on with Miguel O'Hara. You guys are distracted by his muscles and the voice of Oscar Isaac, but I'm not. I don't trust this guy. And then lastly, for the main characters, we have the return of Peter B. Parker, who was such a VIP in the first movie. He was Miles' first mentor, you know, as Spider-Man, and I really came to love the character, especially the arc that he went through in that film. He's just absolutely spectacular. Not to mention he's voiced by Jake Johnson, and his voice is so distinct and so perfect for this character. Again, just like a match made in heaven between voice actor and character. And here in this sequel, when he returns, I was kind of disappointed in him, not gonna lie. Like, I wanted him to be ride or die for Miles. I wanted him to be on Miles' side from jump, the way that Spider-Punk was. But instead, he was kind of drinking the Miguel O'Hara Kool-Aid, and I was just disappointed in Peter B. Parker. Now, he does have this adorable little child, and he does say in the film that, you know, Miles was the reason why he decided to open up to the idea of having kids after he was so vehemently against it with MJ in his world. And that was just such a beautiful sentiment. If only he wasn't betraying Miles whilst he said it. He didn't intend for Miguel to find Miles in that moment, obviously, but he still wasn't on Miles' side the way that I wanted him to be, so I have to dock points. And also, side note, there were a lot of people making a whole hubbub about the fact that Jessica Drew is like heavily pregnant and she's a superhero and blah blah blah. First of all, she's a cartoon. so relax. She's a cartoon, okay? And secondly, I couldn't help but notice that no one had that same energy for Peter B. Parker, who was carrying around a live child during this whole ordeal, and that child was shaking around, jumping up and down, okay? Like, no one was concerned for the safety of that baby. Okay, whatever. And speaking of Jessica Drew, she would be next on the list, but again, I was disappointed because she wasn't on Miles' side. She wasn't even on Gwen's side. Like, come on, you can't even back your mentee. I was frustrated by her allegiance to Miguel, but it does make sense. They have a more extensive history than any of the newer characters do. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing her turn to the light, okay, like the others have, and join their team, because I think she's a sick addition to this cast and I love the way that she's animated. Okay, so we've gone through my thoughts on the main Spider people, but I mean, there were so many, and there were so many Easter eggs that I'm sure went right over my head. I did see the PS4 Spider-Man, I saw Ultimate Spider-Man, I saw Spectacular Spider-Man. These are shows that I actually watched as well, so I was genuinely really excited. Who else did I see? I mean, there was that horse, there was a dinosaur, there was also there was all sorts going on in that film. Of course, we got the incredible cameo from none other than Childish Gambino, from none other than Donald Glover, who was one of the inspirations behind Miles Morales. So that was just incredible. That just brought a huge smile to my face. But yeah, this film was chock full of Easter eggs, cameos, all sorts of things that I'm sure I wouldn't even be able to spot in a second, third, fourth viewing. But I think the key thing that makes this film so spectacular is the fact that it's not just about the Easter eggs. It's not just about the shock value of seeing all of the Spider-Men together, because that happens like way down the line in the film as well. What really draws you in here into the Spider-Verse is the characters, is the incredible animation, and is the brilliant storytelling that hasn't ended yet, because we are going to get a part 2. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was the score and the soundtrack for the film. In terms of the score, it was done by Daniel Pemberton, who is one of my favorite musical composers working today. Okay, I often talk about my love of Ludwig Göransson's body of work, but Daniel Pemberton is also up there in terms of my favorites, and he did an incredible job, like I said, with this sequel. I mean, if you just think about things like the Prowler's theme, like when you hear that noise, you know the Prowler is near, and that's all in the sound design and the score of this film, which he did, so props to him. But now let's turn to the soundtrack. Now, I remember saying in my Spider-Verse trailer reaction that it was interesting that they were relying on the songs from the first film for the trailers and the promo materials, and we hadn't really heard a lot of the soundtrack for the sequel, and that had me a little bit worried, because one of the things that makes the original so iconic was its soundtrack. I mean, that soundtrack was just like above and beyond, like it was perfection. I still listen to those songs on the daily, okay? So yeah, that soundtrack is pretty hard to beat, and I don't think that the soundtrack for the sequel quite reaches the heights of the original soundtrack. There's not quite a sunflower in here. Like Sunflower, again, I rewatched this film last week. Sunflower? Whatever. Anyways, so we didn't quite get there in terms of the soundtrack, but it's still a very, very good soundtrack, and much like the first film, this soundtrack feels like a body of work that Miles would actually be interested in, and that's something that I really appreciate about these films, is that they're always trying to echo Miles's personality. And lastly, since we're on the topic of sound, I did just want to bring up the sound issues that seem to have plagued quite a few of us in the cinemas. I also noticed it in my screening. I struggled to hear the dialogue, which is a shame, because there were so many incredible one-liners being thrown around, especially by Spider-Punk, but I didn't hear a lot of them in my screening, and also because I've gotten so used to watching things with subtitles, it feels like I can't hear as well without them now. But yeah, I did see that people on socials were talking about having the same experience, and it was giving me Tenet flashbacks. I don't think it was as bad as Tenet, thank goodness, but I did notice that there were issues with sound mixing, and that's become an industry-wide issue, so honestly I hope they're able to remedy that as soon as possible. But listen, overall, I mean, they've done it again. They've done it again. What? Oh, I love this franchise. I really do. I'm so happy that this exists. And even though we may be getting a live action Miles Morales soon, okay, which is something that I've been demanding for a while now, Sony, but I'm still so happy that we have this animated version because it's just leaps and bounds beyond what anyone else is doing in the animation space. It just makes me so excited, and I can't wait to see this film again. I know I'm going to get a ton more from it that I didn't even get in the first viewing. But in the meantime, with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse a 9.5 out of 10. So that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.